Hello, friends. Tonight we journey back to a time of flickering torchlight, heavy brocade curtains, and the cold, suspicious stare of a nobleman who's just spotted a wooden spoon. Yes, a utensil so common today it hides in every kitchen drawer, but in certain medieval dining halls, it was enough to send icy shivers down a silk-covered spine. You're about to discover that behind the stone walls of aristocratic privilege, something as simple as carved pine wood could be treated like a cursed relic from the underworld. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is. Drop your location and the hour down in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake in the corner bedchamber of a keep older than memory. Though stone walls sweat at night and the fire's long gone out. The air smells faintly of damp wool and something vaguely mildewed, the perfume of nobility, it seems. A servant has left breakfast on the heavy oak table, barley bread, cheese, and a small bowl of dried apple slices soaked in honeyed wine. And there it is, lying innocently beside the plate like a coiled serpent, a wooden spoon. You stare at it, like it might hiss. Your noble blood chills. You look around. Did anyone see it? Was this an insult, a warning, or worse, a test? In your family, silver spoons are polished every morning, regardless of whether they'll be used. Gold ones are brought out only for visiting dignitaries and grand feasts. Pewter, at worst, is for traveling. But wood is for them, the ones who till your fields and never bathe in rosewater, the ones who call your castle the big rock and eat porridge from bowls carved by hand. No one says it aloud, of course. It's not written in law or etiquette scrolls, but a wooden spoon on a noble plate. It speaks volumes of lost status, of scandal, of bad omens passed down like family curses. Your stomach grumbles, but you push the spoon away with 2 fingers, as if it's contagious. You weren't raised like this. You won't die like this. Not with dried apples and a lump of pine between your teeth. You pace the chamber, cloak flapping behind you like a cape of self-righteous discomfort. You remember your cousin Matilda whispering at a wedding that the Duke of Arvignon once tasted stew with a wooden spoon and broke out in boils the next day. Coincidence? Possibly. Suspicious? Inarguably. Historians still debate whether this noble dread of wooden spoons was rooted in health paranoia, religious symbolism, or pure social snobbery. The truth? Likely all 3 stirred together like medieval soup. Because back then, facts and fear traveled in the same cart, and it rarely had decent wheels. You peek into the corridor. A serving boy scurries past with a bucket and avoids your eyes. Was he the culprit? Was this his doing? A peasant prank? Or maybe, and this is worse, maybe he thinks you don't matter enough for proper silver. You snatch the spoon and march down the hallway, passing tapestries of ancestors glaring. With equal parts judgment and constipation, you half expect them to mutter, "Not the wooden spoon, child," as you hurry past. At the kitchens, the scent of bread and burnt meat mix in the air, comforting in a way you refuse to admit. The cook glances up from a bubbling pot. "Something wrong, my lord." You hold out the spoon like it's evidence in a murder trial. She raises an eyebrow. "That's the travel set. We're short on silver this week. Short? On silver? The horror. Your voice trembles. Why was I served like a stable boy? She shrugs. You are sleeping in the East Tower. That's where we usually house the hunting parties and lesser guests. Ah, the dreaded lesser guest status. You, a third-born noble, have landed in the gray space between bloodline and irrelevance. Just enough privilege to wear buttons, not enough to demand polished silver for apples at dawn. You leave the kitchen more shaken than hungry, spoon still clutched in your hand like a relic of shame. You pass the great hall. The long table is set for the evening feast, glittering with goblets and forks that could double as jewelry. Silver everywhere, the kind that reflects torchlight in just the right way to remind guests. We are clean. We are chosen. We are not wooden. Still, your fingers tighten around the spoon. Something about it lingers. The way it fits in your palm, the soft curve of its bowl. It doesn't clang or clatter. It doesn't burn cold like silver on a winter morning. It's warm, quiet, undemanding. Maybe that's why it scares you. Because it doesn't beg for attention. Because it whispers of simpler lives, of hands that make rather than inherit. And yet even now, even as you admire it, you catch yourself glancing around, making sure no one sees. Because in this world, made of crests and courtesies, of titles and goblets, a wooden spoon isn't just a spoon, it's a threat. A splintered, ordinary, humble little threat to everything you were taught to hold sacred. You don't put the spoon down, not right away at least. You carry it back to your chamber with the awkward devotion of someone unsure whether they're harboring contraband or a secret treasure. Every time you pass a sconce or turn a corner, you hide it in your sleeve like a thief concealing stolen fruit. But no one seems to notice, or worse, they notice and don't care. It's unsettling. You sit at the edge of the creaky bed, the spoon resting in your lap like a stray dog that followed you home. Outside the narrow window slit, a hawk circles, overhead, indifferent to your silent crisis. You remember your tutor, Master Florent, droning on about the history of utensils between sneezes and wine sips. Back then you tuned him out, more interested in carving shapes into the desk with your penknife than absorbing his lecture about the sacred rites of cutlery. But now, your mind replays his words like a forgotten hymn. Spoons, dear students, have always borne symbolic weight. The pharaohs were buried with gold ones. Roman nobles ate with spoons shaped like dolphins. In Christendom, silver spoons were given at baptism, for purity and protection. But wooden spoons? Those were the tools of the poor, the sick, the exiled. They soaked in every broth, every rot, every sin. He had paused then, adjusted his robe, and added, and yes, they harbor germs. Germs. Invisible demons of the mouth and belly. You weren't supposed to care about things like germs, being a medieval noble and all, but still. No one likes invisible assassins. You glance down at the spoon again. Smooth. Harmless. Or is it? There's a superstition you heard once in your aunt's hall, that wooden spoons absorb the soul of the last meal they touched, that they whisper memories if you press them to your ear. Probably nonsense, but then again, this is an era where saints' bones glow and rats carry divine retribution. You do not press it to your ear. Yet. Later that morning, during a gathering in the solar, you find yourself distracted. Lady Isolde is reciting a poem, something about roses and unfulfilled longing, but your mind keeps drifting. You imagine one of the painted cherubs on the ceiling pointing directly at you and shrieking, "He knows the taste of pine." Your seat is far from the hearth, another subtle insult? Or is your status truly just slipping like butter off warm bread? You look around. Everyone holds goblets etched with lions and dragons. Their rings flash with every gesture, their spoons, even for sipping mulled wine or nibbling fruit compote, are polished to blinding brightness. The memory of your breakfast shame burns anew. You clear your throat. "Did you know?" You begin, voice casual, "that wooden spoons harbor more, sickness than metal ones?" Eyes shift toward you. "Indeed," says the Baron's second son, smirking. "And do you often eat with them?" You feel it, like a slap. Your ears go warm. "Of course not," you lie. Laughter floats through the chamber like smoke. Not cruel, but not kind either. The kind of laugh people offer when they're relieved you're the one being laughed at, and not them. You don't mention the spoon again. Not there, not then. But back in your chamber, it waits, like a story you never finished reading. Here's a curious thing. That evening, during supper, the subject of utensils actually returns, completely unprompted by you. One of the elder knights, Sir Gavian, is speaking between mouthfuls of roasted pheasant. "Back in Burgundy," he says, "some priest claimed wooden spoons were cursed, said they leech away virtue." "Virtue?" someone scoffs. "Oh yes," Gavian insists, chewing. "Said a good Christian would lose piety if he supped too long with wood." His words, not mine. "Sounds like he just didn't want to wash dishes," someone else mutters. You pretend to laugh, but the idea sticks. A spoon that saps virtue, that soaks up your righteousness like gravy? Historians still debate whether this belief had theological roots, or was merely another way to draw lines between the pure and the poor. But in your world, where even shoe buckles can be a social ladder, it makes perfect sense. You find yourself watching who uses what spoon during the rest of the meal. Not that many even use spoons, most people dip bread or fingers. But for soup, for custard, only metal, shiny, heavy, sanctified by custom, no wood, except once at the servant's bench. You catch sight of a girl, pale, freckled, maybe 15, lifting porridge to her lips with a battered birch spoon. She doesn't flinch, doesn't even blink. She eats like someone who's never questioned the vessel that feeds her, and somehow that seems powerful. After the feast, in the privacy of your chamber, you take the wooden spoon out again. This time, you really look at it. Its grain runs in gentle waves like time itself brushed across the surface. There's a chip near the handle, but the curve of the bowl is smooth, soft from years of stirring and scraping. It doesn't seem like a threat anymore, more like a relic of something lost. You wonder how many hands have held it, what soups it has swirled, what fires it's warmed beside. You wake up to birds arguing outside your window. Loud, persistent, feathered squabbles as if they're debating who gets to poop on your windowsill first. The light creeping in is golden, warm, too optimistic for how you feel. You slept poorly. Not because of the stone mattress masquerading as a bed or even the midnight howling from the dogs in the kennels. No, your rest was disturbed by dreams. Dreams you blame entirely on that spoon. You remember flashes, a banquet hall filled with smoke, a man whose face melted like wax, a voice whispering, "You shouldn't have taken it." You can't be sure if that was a threat or just your subconscious mimicking your cousin Baldwin. He's always saying things like that, usually before stealing your dice. You reach under your pillow cautiously. Still there. Still wooden. Still silently judging you. Later, during your morning obligations, which mostly involve nodding at tapestries and pretending to understand estate accounts, you can't stop thinking about the spoon. It rides behind your eyes like a shadow stitched to your thoughts. And then something odd happens. You mention it, casually, to Brother Oswin, the castle's librarian and your reluctant Latin tutor. You expect a laugh, maybe a scolding, but instead, he leans in and lowers his voice. "You should be careful," he says. "Wood is porous, it remembers." You blink. "Remembers what?" "Everything," he whispers, eyes wide behind foggy spectacles. That's not helpful. You try to steer the conversation toward something sensible. "I just meant some nobles don't like wooden spoons. They think they're unhygienic or it's not hygiene." Oswin interrupts. "It's heritage. Now that's a word you weren't expecting." "What do you mean?" He looks around, then motions you into the dusty alcove where manuscripts go to retire. There, surrounded by worm-eaten scrolls and half-labeled jars of ink, he says the phrase that sets your entire day off course. "There was a time," he murmurs, "when wooden spoons were tokens of inheritance." Wait. What? Apparently, in some corners of the realm, mostly old Gaelic or Saxon families, wooden spoons weren't just utensils. They were heirlooms, passed from parent to child. A kind of edible lineage, not unlike a family crest or a well-worn dagger. They were carved by hand, each detail etched with care, and each meal eaten with them was a form of communion with one's bloodline. A spoon could carry the memory of a dozen generations. Oswin says reverently, "They believe the wood absorbed not just food but spirit. Your grandmother's stew, your grandfather's cider, each taste lingered, imprinted like breath on glass." That's when he leans even closer and whispers, "But if the lineage, was broken. If someone unworthy used the spoon, he doesn't finish the sentence, you do mentally. They die. Or worse, you're not sure whether to be intrigued or horrified. Probably both. Later that afternoon, during sword drills in the yard, your arms move but your mind does not. The drill master keeps yelling at you to tighten your guard, but you're busy wondering if your wooden spoon belonged to someone important, if it was stolen, if it's cursed, or maybe it's waiting for someone to use it properly. Which, let's face it, wasn't you. You dipped it in bean porridge and left it sticky on a plate for 3 hours. A dishonorable act, if there ever was one. After training, you visit the castle kitchens. Not to confess, of course, just to investigate. You wander through the warm chaos of midday preparations, nodding politely at cooks and scullions. The air smells like garlic and boiling fat and firewood. You find the head, Cook Agnes, yelling at a pot. "Excuse me," you begin awkwardly. "Where do the wooden spoons come from?" She doesn't even look up. "The forest." "Right, yes, but who makes them?" She shrugs. "Some are carved by monks, others by villagers. We trade for them. Why?" You consider telling the truth. Then don't. Instead, you nod and mutter something about family curiosities. Agnes eyes you suspiciously, then goes back to verbally threatening her soup. You slip away, no closer to answers, but now filled with a new suspicion. If spoons once carried heritage, what does that say about yours? Back in your chamber, you examine your wooden spoon again. You trace the handle with your thumb. No crest, no initials, no obvious signs of ancestral power. But still, the texture feels almost familiar now. There's a soft patch where fingers must have gripped it, over and over again. The bowl has faint scratches, like a tiny creature tried to write a message you haven't yet learned to read. And suddenly you wonder, what if this spoon isn't random? What if it found you? Historians still argue over the function of domestic objects as status markers in medieval courts. Some claim spoons were just spoons. Others, the ones with ink-stained fingers and suspiciously poetic souls, believe these utensils were narrative objects, symbols, quiet carriers of meaning in a loud hierarchical world. You've never liked either camp, but now you can't. You decide not to tell anyone else? Not yet. Not because you're worried they'll think you're mad. That ship sailed years ago when you tried to train a falcon using salted pork and stern glances. No. This time your silence is strategic. After all, what if it's true? What if the spoon is more than it appears? So naturally, you begin secretly interrogating your own possessions. You take a careful look at your comb. Just a comb. Unless it holds secrets. Then your boots. Not enchanted. Your chamber pot. You decide not to test fate there. But the spoon, that blasted plain wooden spoon, still demands your attention. It rests now in your cloak, wrapped like a relic as you slip down the castle's quieter corridors. The kind that echo strangely, as though remembering footsteps from years long past. Your destination, the small chamber of Lady Isabet, your aunt's cousin's goddaughter, or some similarly Byzantine connection. She's not particularly noble, but she is particularly odd, which is precisely what you need right now. Isabet spends her days tending herbs and whispering to animals, most of whom wisely ignore her. She also claims to have visions, though these usually involve a lot of fennel tea and dramatic sighing. You find her cross-legged in her alcove, braiding lavender into her sleeves. "Do you have anything of the dead?" she asks without looking up. You blink. "That's a bold opening line." She shrugs. "You have that look, like you've handled something haunted." You sit, slowly. "It's a spoon." Her face lights up. "Ah, of course. It always starts with spoons." That's not the comforting response you were hoping for. You unwrap the spoon and place it on the floor between you. She doesn't touch it, just gazes at it like it might bite. "Do you feel it hum?" she asks. You shake your head. "It's wood." Isabet leans forward, eyes narrowed. "Wood is old. Trees are older than language." "You don't think they remember things?" You start to argue but stop. You were literally told that earlier, by a librarian. And everyone knows librarians are 90% truth and 10% mildew. Isabet begins murmuring something, maybe a prayer, maybe a recipe for mushroom soup. Then she takes out a tiny jar of what looks suspiciously like crushed beetles and blows a pinch over the spoon. Nothing happens. You breathe a little easier. Then the spoon rolls. Not much. Just an inch. As though nudged by an invisible thumb. Isabet gasps. It answered. You, on the other hand, begin reevaluating your entire life. She leans even closer. You need to take it to the Bone Chapel. This you've never heard of. Which, given that you live here and routinely eavesdrop on servants' gossip, is saying something. What chapel? It's not on any map, she says softly. It was buried, walled in, forgotten. They said it was too full of relics, too dangerous. But some say the relics were never saints, just cursed things people didn't want to burn. Naturally. The one place you're now supposed to visit is also the place explicitly deemed too dangerous for public use. You consider declining, politely with a firm, "I'd rather not be buried under falling masonry, thank you." But the spoon twitches again, just slightly, and you sigh. Of course. You spend the next 2 days pretending everything's fine, which is exhausting, because now everything feels suspicious. The way the steward eyes your cloak, the way the cat refuses to enter your room, the way your dreams keep replaying a banquet that never happened. You finally sneak out at dawn on the 3rd day. You have a general direction, northwest of the stables, past the abandoned orchard near the ruins where they used to hang dishonest tailors. Classic real estate for forbidden chapels. As you approach, the air shifts. Colder. Still. The kind of stillness that makes you walk softer, like even the ground is holding its breath. You find it behind a tangle of briars. An arched doorway sunken into the earth, half swallowed by time. The door is stone, carved with symbols you recognize only because you once cheated on a Latin test by hiding notes in your glove. Skulls, snakes, a fork with 7 tines. A bit dramatic, but you get the point. You press the spoon against the seal. A soft click. Then the door groans open and you're hit with a scent like damp books and boiled leather. Inside, the chapel is tiny. Bones line the walls. Femurs, skulls, ribs, arranged in patterns that someone probably thought were reverent but mostly just resemble really creepy wallpaper. Candles flicker, though you didn't light any. And in the center, on a cracked pedestal, lies a bowl. Not golden, not jeweled, just ceramic. Plain. You place the spoon inside. Nothing happens. At first. Then a faint warmth crawls up your fingers. Not from the bowl, but the spoon itself. As though recognizing its place. Or remembering something too ancient for words. You hear whispers. Not in your ears, inside your head. Fragmented, lost, hungry. And then a name. Not yours, but one that makes your knees wobble. You recognize it. It's from your family tree. A name your mother only mentioned once, in a hush, during a thunderstorm. Eldrick the Blackened. A knight who vanished after being accused of poisoning. A king's feast. They never found the poison, only his spoon. Historians still debate whether Eldrick ever existed. Some claim he was a scapegoat for a failed kitchen boy. Others argue he was a noble turned renegade, hiding his crimes behind titles and forged heraldry. Now, holding the spoon, standing in a chapel built from bones, you're starting to think, maybe he never left. Maybe he just waited. The spoon doesn't move again. It just rests in the bowl. Innocent. Silent. Like it didn't just whisper a name etched deep in your family's darker footnotes. Like it's not possibly connected to a man once described in chronicles as the one who fed death to kings. You step back slowly, half expecting the chapel to collapse or the bones to rearrange into something with too many eyes. But nothing happens. Not yet. Instead, there's a shift. Not in sound, but in sensation. The air feels like it's waiting. Like you've disturbed a page that was never meant to be turned. You hurry back to the castle. Naturally, the moment you re-enter, the cook grabs you. There you are. Lord Everwald wants you at the high table tonight. He says your silence lately has made him suspicious. Smile more. This is how things work here. You stare too long at a suspicious artifact and someone immediately wants you to make polite conversation over goose pâté. That evening, you sit at the table with your usual grace, by which I mean you nearly trip over a serving dog and stab yourself with a parsley sprig. Lord Everwald raises his goblet toward you. My young cousin returns from his mysterious errand. I trust you weren't conspiring with brigands? You smile. Barely. Just getting some air. Ha, air. Useless thing unless you can tax it. Everyone laughs politely. You take a sip of watered wine and try not to glance at the silverware. Because here's the thing. You've begun to notice something. The higher the rank at this table, the more elaborate the cutlery. Gold, ivory, even glass, but never ever wood. Even the peasants get tin. The only wooden utensils are used in the kitchen or in prison, and that makes you wonder. Again, why? You think back to that name. Eldrick the Blackened. What if his story wasn't just forgotten, but buried, sanitized in the official histories? You make a mental note to return to the library. Perhaps there's more to find. But that night, sleep comes slowly. When it does, you dream, though dream might be generous. It's more like falling sideways into a memory that isn't yours. You stand in a feast hall. The air is thick with roast, meat and sweat. Torches flicker, and at the head of the table a man in dark armor smiling too widely. He lifts a wooden spoon to his mouth and collapses. You wake up gasping. You sit up, blinking into the darkness of your chamber. Your breath fogs slightly, strange given that it's not cold. And there, at the foot of your bed, is the spoon. You know for a fact you left it in the bone chapel. It shouldn't be here. But there it is, lying politely on your blanket like it wants to snuggle. You do what any sensible person would do. You throw it across the room. It bounces once and lands on your boot. Not dramatically, just persistently. You try to ignore it. You bury yourself under your furs, hoping it'll go away. It doesn't. The next morning, you try to confide in the only other person in the castle who might believe you. Brother Aldrich, the half-blind monk who insists that pigeons are government spies. You don't have the heart to explain governments aren't that organized. He listens as you describe the dream, the name, the chapel. When you show him the spoon, he doesn't flinch. He nods. You should burn it. That catches you off guard. Burn it? He leans in, voice low. Wood remembers, especially wood used in sacred rites, or murders, or both. You try to press him for more. Dates, names, maybe a handy how-to guide on haunted utensils, but he just mutters something about apples and retreats into the scriptorium. Helpful. So you try your own research. You return to the library. You bribe the librarian with candied almonds and your least threatening smile. She relents. Try the restricted folios, the ones in the back. Left side, under Maledicta Domestica. You find it. A leather-bound volume that smells like mildew and boiled cabbage. Inside, a list of cursed household objects across centuries. Chairs that throw people. Blankets that whisper secrets. Mirrors that reflect futures. And spoons. You flip to the relevant entry. The spoon of Ealdrick, carved from gallows wood, was said to leach the soul of any noble who used it in pride. It passed through many hands, all of whom met untimely ends, often during meals. Believed lost in the fire of Lantern Abbey, though some claim it was hidden to prevent further bloodshed. There's a woodcut illustration. You know that spoon. It's your spoon. You sit back. Gallows wood. Of course. Trees grown on execution sites. Infused with death, some say. Used rarely, and never by accident. You start to piece things together. Eldrick, the feast, the collapse, the poison that was never found. What if it wasn't poison? What if it was the spoon? an object that feeds on pride, that punishes excess, that returns again and again to noble hands. You try to laugh it off, but something inside you knows this isn't just a ghost story. The spoon chose you, and worse, you used it. You try to throw it in the moat. It reappears the next morning in your breakfast porridge. You bury it in the garden. It shows up under your pillow. You give it to a servant girl and tell her to flee to the next village. She returns 2 hours later, confused. You left this in my apron. You don't even bother asking how it got there. By the third day, you realize something. This isn't just a haunted object. You stop eating with spoons entirely. Forks? Fine. Fingers? Excellent. But spoons, wooden or otherwise, are a hard no. Unfortunately, your sudden avoidance of curved, bowl-shaped implements doesn't go unnoticed. At a banquet 3 nights later, Lord Everwald stares pointedly as you pick at your stew with a dull knife. Strange technique, cousin. Trying to invent a new form of etiquette? You mumble something about fasting, which, yes, isn't convincing when you're stuffing bread in your mouth like it's your last meal. Everwald narrows his eyes. You nobles and your eccentricities. First it's goose leather slippers, then it's abstaining from spoons. A pause. You know, they say madness runs in our family. You nod politely and chew aggressively. Because here's the thing. It's not madness. It's history. And it's following you around like a puppy made of vengeance. Back in the privacy of your chamber, you try again to destroy the spoon. You boil it in salt water. You wrap it in iron shavings and bury it under a cairn of holy rocks. You whisper apologies to it. You shout threats. You even offer it a tiny crown made of thyme sprigs, hoping maybe flattery would soothe its malevolence. It doesn't. The spoon continues to haunt your space. It doesn't fly through the air or emit eerie chants. It's more passive-aggressive than that. You'll open a chest and there it is, lying atop your socks. You'll unroll a scroll and it falls out like punctuation. You suspect it's waiting, watching, not with malice exactly, more with quiet judgment, the kind your great-aunt gave you when you confused a fish knife for a butter knife that one time at court. You return to the library. This time, you dig deeper into the folios. Not just legends, but family histories. And there, in a cracked genealogy, you find it Ealdric the Blackened, not a distant cousin, a direct ancestor. On your mother's side, a nobleman with a difficult temperament and a long list of enemies, died at a feast, no clear cause. But here's the kicker. Before his death, Ealdric was known for a rather dramatic proposal, banning all wooden utensils from noble estates. He claimed they carried the whispers of the lowborn and had no place near noble lips. You imagine a medieval PowerPoint presentation titled, "Why Wood is the Enemy of Aristocracy." But the backlash was intense. Servants resisted. Merchants revolted. Apparently, spoons made from exotic hardwoods were status symbols in some circles, particularly among nobles trying to pretend they were in touch with the people. The ban failed. And Ealdric, well, he dined alone one night, insisted on tasting every dish himself, died before dessert. Historians still argue whether it was political sabotage or poetic justice. Some claim he was poisoned, Others suggest the spoon absorbed his arrogance and simply returned it in kind. But now, centuries later, it's back, and it's with you. You start to notice changes. You can hear things you shouldn't, whispers behind stone walls, servants muttering, secrets in other rooms, and occasionally you glimpse things out of the corner of your eye. A shadow where there shouldn't be one, a shape hunched in a doorway that vanishes when you turn. You're losing sleep. Even the guards notice. "You look pale, my lord," one says, trying not to glance at the spoon poking out of your belt like a badge of dishonor. You try to play it cool. "Just a new diet. It's called not dying mysteriously in my soup." They don't laugh. Eventually, in a moment of desperation, you consult the oldest servant in the castle, Old Nan, who, as far as you can tell, came with the original stones. She stares at the spoon in silence for a long time. Then she nods solemnly. "That's no eating spoon," she says. "That's a soul spoon." You blink. "A what?" "Soul spoon," she repeats. "Carved from a hanging tree, used in dark rites, meant to taste not food, but pride. You feed your arrogance, or it feeds on you." You'd laugh if she weren't dead serious. Also, if this entire explanation didn't line up with everything you've learned, you ask how to break the curse. She sucks her toothless gums and says, "Well, they say the only way to end it is to use the spoon on someone nobler than you." "That's not hard," you mutter. "Have you met me?" But she holds up a bony finger. They also say the spoon knows. It won't feed if the meal isn't seasoned with proper vanity. Delightful. You're now stuck with a utensil that functions like a moral compass from hell. Worse, still the other nobles have noticed your avoidance. One night, a lady from a visiting estate corners you. "I heard you've developed a curious relationship with wooden spoons," she says, sipping wine. "A romantic entanglement, perhaps?" You try to laugh it off, but your chuckle sounds like a squirrel choking on a plum pit. She leans closer. "Be careful. Superstitions have a way of turning into truths. And in this court, truths become weapons." You think back to the dream, the shadow, the fall of Eldrick, and suddenly you wonder, how many others had dreams like yours? How many carried this spoon before it found you? That night, the spoon doesn't hide. It lies openly on your writing desk beside a flickering candle, and for the first time, you don't look away. You stare at it. The next morning, you do something reckless. You pack the spoon in a velvet pouch, the same one your grandmother used for her prized chess pieces, and set out on horseback toward the monastery library 3 towns over. Yes, it's technically outside your jurisdiction, and yes, the abbot there once called your family excessively scented, but you're out of options. The road is long and dust-choked, lined with twisted trees and the occasional peasant hauling turnips. You clutch the pouch tight every time the horse stumbles. You're half convinced the spoon is going to burst out and yell, "Unhand me, you common swine." It doesn't, but it hums. Not audibly, more like a pressure behind your teeth. Like the air right before lightning. By the time you reach the monastery, you're half convinced the spoon is plotting a coup. The monks greet you with the kind of forced politeness reserved for nobles and invasive species. They usher you into the scriptorium, a cold, echoey chamber filled with ancient texts and older monks. The place smells like dust and regret. You meet Brother Gillian, the head archivist. He has the face of a raisin and the patience of an avalanche. I need to know about cursed utensils, you say, skipping pleasantries. His eyes narrow. Wooden? You nod. You don't bother taking the pouch out yet. He might run. Instead, you tell him the story. The dreams. The reappearances. The legacy of Ealdric the Blackened and his anti-cutlery campaign. He listens without interrupting, except for one raised eyebrow when you mention the spoon making itself comfortable in your laundry chest. Finally, he stands. He shuffles to a locked cabinet, produces a key from inside his robe, somehow, and unlocks the creaky doors. Inside, a single brittle volume wrapped in cloth. This is the Speculum Obscurum, he says, compiled by inquisitors, suppressed by kings. It contains the strange. You open it with care, and there it is. Page 233. An ink drawing. A spoon. Your spoon, down to the slightly warped handle, captioned beneath, Lignum Arrogantii, the spoon of vanity. According to the text, it was carved from the limb of a tree that grew atop a battlefield soaked in noble blood. The monk who carved it believed that wood remembered emotion, pride, rage, betrayal, and that a vessel carved from such wood would reflect the soul of its user. The spoon was used in rituals meant to test a noble's humility. If the user was found wanting, well, they didn't exactly get a certificate and a handshake. The section ends with a line that hits you right between the ribs. Many carried it. Few survived it. None learned from it. Brother Gillian looks grave. These things, they attach to bloodlines, especially the stubborn ones. You nod slowly. That tracks. Your family is famous for two things: their refusal to admit fault and their elaborate mustache grooming. You finally show him the pouch. He takes one look and steps back. I'd recommend not using it again, he says. You raise an eyebrow. What if it uses me? He doesn't have an answer for that. You leave the monastery feeling no better and significantly colder. That night, back in your castle, you try sleeping with the spoon locked in a chest. You even stack a Bible on top for good measure. You're not sure if the spoon fears scripture, but it feels like a solid just in case. You dream again. Only this time it's not the banquet. It's a long table, endless. Dozens of nobles. All eating, all silent, each one with a wooden spoon. They stare ahead, unblinking. And slowly, terribly, they turn to look at you. You wake up to find the chest open, the Bible on the floor, the spoon on your pillow. You don't scream. You're past that stage now. You just sigh. Of course. You begin to suspect the spoon is trying to teach you something. Humility, maybe. You think back to old Nan's words about feeding the spoon to someone nobler than you. But what if it's not about them being nobler? What if it's about you? Becoming less so? In a fit of tired inspiration, you ride out to the village the next morning. No guards, no pomp. You wear plain clothes. A hat so wide and floppy it probably violates sumptuary laws. And for a full day you work. You carry buckets. You muck out a stall. You help an old woman gather herbs. The villagers stare, sure, but they're too polite, or too frightened to ask. At dusk, exhausted and sore in places you didn't know existed, you sit by a fire and take out the spoon. It's warm, softer somehow. No humming, you almost dare to hope. until a boy walks past and says, "Nice spoon, my lord. We had one like that. Caught fire in the soup." You nod politely. "Thank you, that's extremely helpful." You still don't sleep well that night. But the dreams are changing. The banquet hall is emptier now. And you're not seated at the head of the table anymore. You're sweeping. The spoon rests in your belt, and this time it doesn't glow. It rests. Maybe it's content. You wake up with hay in your hair and an unfamiliar peace in your chest, the kind that only comes after humility has rubbed your nose in the mud and whispered, "See? Wasn't so bad." The spoon, now slightly dulled in sheen, lies beside you, on the windowsill basking in the early sun like it's meditating. It doesn't hum. It doesn't shift. It just exists. That alone should be cause for celebration. But you're not that naive anymore. After all, this is a piece of wood with a history of psychological warfare. Still, something is different. That night you actually sleep. Not the half-sleep of dread or the shallow doze of paranoia, but the sort of drooling, limb-splayed slumber that medieval poets wrote about when they ran out of rhymes for plague. And your dream? No feasts, no noble ghosts, just a forest. Quiet, familiar. The spoon tucked into your belt doesn't whisper or glow. It just accompanies you like a faithful, if emotionally complicated, dog. When you wake, you find yourself wondering, is it over? Spoiler, it's not. Because 2 days later, a messenger arrives from your cousin Alphonse. He's planning a grand feast. Boars, mead, unflattering lute music, the works. You're invited, and of course you're expected to bring a dish of your own creation. A recent fashion among nobles who like to pretend they've ever touched an onion. You glance at the spoon, it glints. Subtly, you frown. You don't like where this is going. Still, curiosity is a powerful motivator. That, and your family's centuries-old tendency to throw yourself into clearly cursed situations with only the thinnest veil of sarcasm as armor. So you agree. You'll cook, you'll serve, and you'll use the spoon. Because let's face it, the only way out of this madness is straight through the souffle. The kitchen staff is horrified. You announce with great confidence that you, a noble who once fainted at the smell of goat cheese, will be personally preparing the feast's centerpiece. Dish they offer to fake your death instead. You decline. You spend hours poring over cookbooks, ancient ones, the kind written before fire safety was invented, and eventually settle on something ambitious but achievable. A creamy mushroom stew with toasted barley and a dramatic drizzle of something vaguely herbaceous. You cook it entirely yourself. You chop, stir, sweat, and stir again, and you use the spoon. Every time it touches the stew, you feel sharper. Not smarter per se, but more focused. Like your senses are dialed in. You can smell every individual note. You taste the earthiness, the faint bitterness of the roots. It's perfect. Terrifyingly perfect. The day of the feast arrives. You ride to Alphonse's estate with your pot of stew cradled on your lap like a newborn. The spoon rides inside it, unnervingly serene. At the banquet, nobles gather like powdered moths around a very expensive flame. Perfumes clash in the air like warring armies. Every sentence begins with, "Have you heard?" or ends with, "though." Of course, we never say it aloud. Alphonse greets you with the warmth of a man who's recently invested in something risky and wants to talk about it for 9 hours. Can't wait to try your dish, he beams. You know, I read a scroll on umami recently. You nod, smile. Try not to show that your stew is vibrating. It's not literal, but it feels like it. Finally, you serve it. One ladle at a time. And the nobles, ever the cautious predators, take tentative bites. Then silence. One by one, they lower their spoons. Some stare at the ceiling. Others sigh, misty-eyed. Lady Brielle clutches your arm and murmurs, I tasted my childhood. Sir Camden weeps. Alphonse demands you marry his daughter. She's 3. It's a triumph, the kind that earns you ballads, or at least a strongly worded footnote in the family annals. And then someone asks about the spoon. You freeze. It's Count Ferreth, a man with suspiciously manicured eyebrows and the social grace of an eel. That's not just any spoon, he says, eyes narrowing. That's familiar. You try to deflect. Say it was your grandmother's. He leans in. Wasn't she the one who thought she was haunted by the ghost of her cutlery? You nod, slowly. She also thought cheese could predict the weather. Ferreth's eyes widen. It is the spoon of vanity, isn't it? The room goes quiet. Someone drops a goblet. Alphonse hisses. You brought a cursed spoon to my house? You raise your hands. Technically, it brought itself. It's +1. There's panic. Someone invokes the Inquisition. Another starts muttering a prayer. You sigh, you stand, and you tell the truth. The whole weird, sleep-deprived truth about the dreams, the legacy, the monks, the village work, the stew. You tell them you think the spoon doesn't curse people randomly, that it doesn't punish nobility for being noble, but for being arrogant about it, for forgetting humility, for pretending to be above others. You say it's a test. A strange one, yes. Possibly invented by a vindictive druid with poor table manners. But a test all the same, and you pass it when you remember the basics: kindness, effort, honesty, and maybe washing your hands once in a while. There's a long silence, and then, miraculously, Alphonse nods. Well, he says, the stew was phenomenal. The others slowly relax. Someone refills their goblet. The harpist starts playing again. Nobility, it turns out, has a very short memory when comfort food is involved. Later, as the stars rise over Alphonse's estate and laughter bubbles through the garden, you slip away with the spoon. It's warm again, almost soft. The next morning you wake to the faint smell of roses and roast boar, which is either an impressive feat of gardening or a sign that someone's cooking in the hedge maze again. You stretch, blink at the sunlight pooling across the tapestries, and glance at the bedside table. The spoon is there, upright, balanced precariously on its rounded end like it's practicing yoga. You sigh, because just when you thought maybe, just maybe, the chaos had ended, here it is again. Not malevolent, not glowing ominously, just present. Like an awkward uncle at a wedding who brought his own tambourine, you dress, descend the stairs, and find Alphonse in the dining hall with a smile that says, I'm about to ruin your day, but politely. He gestures to a scroll. Word of, your stew has spread. The Duke of Belcaster wants you to prepare a feast at his spring equinox banquet. You blink. Me? Alphonse nods, clearly proud. You and your spoon. Of course. You try to say no. You really do. You talk about boundaries. About how you're not a trained chef. About how one of your fingers is still bandaged from a run-in with an overly ambitious parsnip. But nobles don't hear no. They hear, please raise the stakes. So 2 weeks later, you find yourself in Belcaster, staring at a kitchen the size of a chapel, and wondering what kind of person builds a marble fountain indoors just to rinse apples. The Duke is charming. In the way cobras are charming, sleek, elegant, and absolutely lethal. He wants a menu that reflects a new era of noble enlightenment. Whatever that means, you nod. Say, of course, and quietly begin plotting your escape. But the spoon hums. Not literally. It doesn't sing sea shanties or whisper riddles. But you feel the resonance. A quiet pull. Like it wants to be here. Which is concerning. So you cook. Again. This time it's a 6-course affair. Root vegetable terrine, honey roasted fowl, something called aspic that you regret immediately, and a dessert involving rose petals and existential dread. The spoon guides. Your hand, not with force but with a gentle intuition. When you stir, you know when to stop. When you taste, flavors bloom like symphonies. It's unnatural, but it's also beautiful. That night the nobles dine under a canopy of lanterns and embroidered stars. They murmur reverently over the food. They toast your gift. Someone calls you a culinary prophet. Another compares you to a flavor oracle. You try to smile, but something's off. After the feast you find the Duke alone on the balcony, swirling his wine like he's auditioning for a tragedy. He doesn't look at you when he speaks. You know, my grandmother told me about that spoon. You pause. She said it once belonged to a bishop who used it to convince peasants that he could taste sins in their soup. Okay, that's new. She also said he died choking on a pearl. No one knows how it got in his porridge. You glance at the spoon. It's resting innocently in your apron pocket. But now it feels heavier. Historians still debate whether the pearl was divine punishment or just bad culinary judgment, the Duke continues, sipping his wine. But one thing's certain. The spoon shows up when people get clever. You frown. Clever? He turns to you, eyes sharp. When they start thinking they're above consequences. You want to ask if he's talking about himself or about you, but you don't. Instead, you thank him for the invitation, make an excuse about early travel, and escape into the night with only the spoon and a handful of candied almonds you definitely weren't supposed to take. You ride through fog, through silence, and then you notice something strange. At the next inn, the innkeeper won't take your gold. He's heard of you. You're the noble who humbled himself in the fields, right? The one with the spoon that cooks virtue into food. You blink. He grins. My daughter hasn't eaten meat in weeks, but when she had your stew, she dreamed of birds and woke up, singing. You smile, awkwardly. Thank him. Then sit in the dark and wonder how many other people now associate you with miracle seasoning and moral growth. Because here's the problem. You didn't want to be a legend. You just didn't want to be cursed anymore, but now you're a symbol. A noble who got off his high horse, learned to saute, and made stew so pure it healed childhood trauma. And the spoon? It's glowing again, faint, soft, but unmistakable. You hold it up to the firelight, watching the runes shimmer faintly. What are you becoming? Because you were once just another pampered aristocrat with a mild fear of legumes. Now, you're something else. Not quite a chef, not quite a prophet, something in between. And the worst part, you think you're starting to like it. The next morning, you don't run from the spoon. You pack it carefully. You clean it with reverence. And as you head toward the next village, the one with the sick healer and the mayor who refuses to eat food that isn't pickled, you smile to yourself, because deep down, you know something now. The spoon never cursed you. It just revealed you. You ride beneath skies the color of wet parchment, past fields where scarecrows raise their arms like they're trying to tell you something ominous. Maybe it's just the wind. Maybe it's the spoon again. Hard to say. The village of Fenwick appears over the hill like a rumor someone turned into buildings. Mud clings to every surface. The roofs sag like they're too tired to keep doing this. And the people? They eye you like you might ask them for money or worse, opinions. You dismount. Smile. Try to look approachable, like a noble on holiday, who just happens to carry a cooking utensil of mystical provenance. It doesn't work. The mayor meets you on the edge of the square, a wide man with a mustache that's clearly plotting rebellion. His cloak is stained with something that was probably a stew once back in better times. "We don't need outsiders," he says by way of hello. You nod. Perfect. I'm not very outside anymore. He doesn't laugh. We heard about the spoon. Of course he did. And about the chickens that started laying twice a day after your last meal. You blink. That's a new. I don't do poultry miracles, you say carefully. He narrows his eyes. That's what someone who does poultry miracles would say. You take a breath and explain. You're not here to start a cult, cure plagues, or summon divine gravy. You're just passing through and maybe you could cook something. He eyes the spoon like it might lunge at him, then shrugs. Fine, but I'm watching you. Because nothing says trust like public surveillance during dinner prep. You're ushered into the village kitchen, which is generous phrasing. It's more a shack with ambition. The cauldron is cracked. The herbs are more aspirational than edible. And the only meat available is questionable. Still, you work. You chop, stir, and hum softly as the rain begins to tap against the roof like it's trying to join in. The villagers gather slowly. First one, then three, then all of them, drawn not just by the scent but by that strange, subtle hush that follows the spoon. Like something sacred is happening. Or like someone's cooking with actual seasoning for the first time in years. You serve them lentil stew with parsnip ribbons and a garnish of whatever green thing was clinging to life in the window box. They eat. They sigh. And something shifts. An old woman begins to cry quietly into her bowl. A young boy whispers that it tastes like the stories his grandmother used to tell. And the mayor? He stares into his bowl like it just revealed the meaning of life, then clears his throat and declares, "It's fine," you smile. That's practically a standing ovation around here. But just as you begin to think this could be your new life, wandering cook, village redeemer, emotionally grounded with a healthy glow, A stranger enters the square. He's dressed like a monk, but cleaner. His robes are stitched with golden thread. His eyes scan the crowd, then land on you. You have something that doesn't belong to you. You sigh. Is it the spoon? You ask, already knowing the answer. He nods. It was crafted for a specific purpose. One you're interfering with, of course. You resist the urge to throw the spoon in a lake and become a baker. But it's too late. The villagers are watching. The mayor is brandishing a ladle like he's ready to duel. And the stranger? He steps closer. This utensil was part of a sacred trial, he says, used to test the humility of those who sought to lead. You blink. Lead what, the kitchen? He doesn't smile. The realm. Ah. So that's what this is. A prophecy spoon. Of course it is. You glance at the villagers, then at your hand, where the spoon has started to glow, again, with that faint golden light that now feels less like a curse and more like an annoyingly clingy life coach. The monk doesn't demand it back. He simply watches. You've passed every test, he says, and the final one begins now. You want to ask what the test is, but instead, the ground rumbles. Literally, the villagers scream. You rush outside just in time to see half the riverbank collapse into mud, taking with it 2 carts, 1 goat, and the only bridge that connects the village to the next town. Well, so much for stew diplomacy. You don't think. You act. Rope, boards, shouted instructions. You direct villagers like you're suddenly a construction foreman in a high-stakes medieval disaster film. And the spoon? It's in your hand the whole time. Not stirring now, but pointing, subtly, as if it knows where the next crack will form. Where to brace the beams, how to redirect the floodwater. When it's over, everyone's drenched, covered in silt, and too tired to question how a kitchen utensil just helped prevent a full-blown catastrophe. The monk smiles faintly. You have chosen service over glory. Perhaps that's enough. You want to ask if the test is done. If you can go home. If you even have a home anymore. Or if it's just wherever you happen to be when someone says, "Can you make soup?" But the monk is already fading into the mist like a cliché in sandals. And the villagers, they cheer, they hug you, they say things like, "We'll never forget what you've done, and please take this goat, we insist." You don't take the goat. You do take the spoon. And as you ride away again, you think about what the monk said. Leadership, humility, tests. You ride with the wind in your ears and dried mud in your eyebrows. The spoon tucked into your belt like a tiny judgmental sword. Behind you, Fenwick fades into fog and memory. Ahead, another road, another village, another deeply confusing chapter in the world's weirdest culinary pilgrimage. You pass under trees so tall they look like they're holding up the sky. And for a moment, everything is quiet, peaceful. Then your stomach growls. Not from hunger, not really, but from a gnawing need to cook. It's the same itch that's haunted you since that first night when the spoon practically leapt into your hand like it had somewhere to be. You'd love to resist it, ignore it, maybe take a vacation in a place without sentient cookware. But no. The spoon tugs again, not physically, but in your mind. A gentle insistence like a dog nosing your knee when it's walk o'clock. You sigh and follow. The next village is called Eldon Ridge, and it smells faintly of onions and regret. There's a market square, two cobblers competing across the street from each other, and a statue of some dead noble who looks like he lost a bet with a pigeon. You're halfway through appreciating a particularly sarcastic weaver's tapestry when you hear a familiar phrase. Wooden spoons are the devil's work. It's muttered by an elderly woman with a face like a preserved apple. She's stirring soup with a metal rod and glaring at her ingredients like they personally betrayed her. You pause. I heard that's not uncommon, you say, trying to sound casual. She snorts. You heard? Boy, if you knew half the things. I've seen wooden spoons do. You raise an eyebrow. Such as. Her voice drops to a whisper. Sour ale. Curdled cream. Children born with opinions. You try very hard not to laugh. Failing somewhat. Historians still argue, she continues, whether it was the spoons or the people who were cursed. But me? I've lived long enough to know the truth. It's both. Another local theologian / soup enthusiast. You offer to cook with her, just to see, just to test the theory. She hesitates, but eventually nods. Fine, but if anything bursts into flames, it's your fault. You take the spoon from your belt, she gasps, not in fear but reverence. That one, she says slowly. I've seen that one before. You blink. When? She stares at it. Years ago, during the salt famine, a traveler came through, used a spoon just like that, saved the whole town with 6 turnips and a prayer. You frown. Same spoon. Looks like it, though it was cleaner. Rude. You begin to cook. She watches. The broth simmers like a secret just about to spill. The vegetables practically arrange themselves, and somewhere deep in the pot you swear you hear a hum, like the spoon is singing, or possibly threatening. When it's done, the old woman tastes it. Her eyes close. She doesn't speak for a full minute. Then she opens them and mutters, "Witchcraft." You smile. Technically, it's thyme and a bit of dried sage. She cackles, which sounds like a goose trying to apologize for its whole personality. The townsfolk come. They eat. They ask questions you don't know how to answer. Where did you learn to cook like this? Is that really wood? Can you bless my ladle? You tell them the truth. You don't know. It just happens. The spoon helps or compels. It's hard to tell at this point. Then someone asks a different question. Why are you doing this? You pause. No one's asked that before. Why are you doing this? You're not being paid. You're not chasing fame. You're tired. You're cold. You haven't had a decent night's sleep since that monk appeared out of the fog like a motivational ghost. You look at the spoon. It glows faintly, the way embers do just before they go out. I think, you say slowly, because someone has to. and maybe that's enough. But even as you say it, you realize something. The spoon is growing heavier in your hand. Not physically, not yet, but spiritually. As if it's absorbing every fear, hope, and expectation laid on you by the people you meet. You wonder how long you can carry it. That night, the innkeeper gives you a room with straw-stuffed pillows and a mattress that politely pretends not to be half rocks. You lie awake. Outside, rain patters on the roof like someone drumming their fingers with growing impatience. The spoon lies beside you on the windowsill, watching, always watching. You sit up. Are you testing me or using me? You ask. The spoon doesn't answer. Of course it doesn't. It's a spoon. Still, you remember what the monk said? The final test begins now, and you can't help but think, what if it hasn't begun yet? What if all of this has just been warm-up? You shiver, not from cold, but from the sense that something is coming. Something that will demand more than lentil stew and quick reflexes. Something that will finally explain why wooden spoons frighten the rich and confuse the poor. You close your eyes. You wake to find the spoon gone. It's not on the windowsill, not beside your travel bag, not tucked under the mattress like emergency silverware. Just gone. Vanished. Evaporated into the morning mist like a shy ghost. Your heart stutters in your chest. Maybe it left. Maybe it got tired of waiting for you to live up to some mysterious wooden destiny. Or maybe someone took it. Someone who knows what it really is. You sprint downstairs, slippers flapping like disgruntled pancakes. The innkeeper raises an eyebrow but wisely says nothing. You burst into the street scanning for... what exactly? A thief? A rogue chef? A nobleman in disguise licking a spoon? But the town square is quiet. Until it isn't. Because you hear it. A distant scream. Then two more. Not panicked screams, delighted ones. Excited. Like a town that just discovered chocolate for the first time or collectively found out about indoor plumbing. You follow the noise. It leads you to the market. Crowds of people circle a small cart, cheering and clapping as if a minor miracle is unfolding between the turnip stand and a man who insists he can juggle leeches. You push through, and there it is. The spoon, glowing faintly, balanced in the hands of a boy no older than 12, standing atop the cart and stirring a pot of something that smells like roasted apples, onions, and impossible promises. You stare. He stares back. Then the boy, who clearly has never seen a cooking class or a candle that didn't scare him, lifts the spoon like it's Excalibur and grins. "What is that?" you whisper to the woman beside you. She fans herself. That's young Master Torin. Found the spoon this morning and suddenly started making chutney like a divine wind possessed his elbows. You want to object. You need to object. That's your spoon. Except, it isn't. It was never really yours. You were just the current host? Handler? Handler sounds cool. You approach. Torin squints at you. You here to take it back? You hesitate. Only if it wants to come. He shrugs. It helped me make a pudding that made Mr. Callum cry, and admit he misses his first wife, so pretty sure it likes me now. You can't help it. You laugh. The absurdity has become its own kind of gravity. You lean in gently. Has it told you anything? Not really, he replies. But it shows me stuff. Flavors. How much salt to use. How to smell when the bread is about to lie to you. You nod. Slowly. Yeah. That tracks. Historians still debate whether medieval guild apprentices were chosen for talent, lineage, or some ancient form of divine kitchen bingo. And now here you are, watching a kid become a prodigy overnight thanks to a cursed spoon that possibly predates algebra. You sit with him for a while. He lets you stir once. Just once. The feeling returns. The gentle hum. The sense of rightness, like falling into rhythm with something older than words. But this time it's weaker, fainter. The spoon is moving on. And you? Well, you're not sad, not exactly, just hollow. Like someone scooped out your purpose with, ironically, a spoon. But as you rise to leave, Torin says, "Wait." You turn. He digs into a pouch and hands you something small wrapped in cloth. You unwrap it. A spoon. Not the spoon. This one is plain, slightly burned on the handle, and crooked like someone used it to fight off raccoons. But it's handmade, carefully carved, from the same wood. Torin grins. Thought you might want your own. You laugh again, but softer this time. That night back at the inn, you sit by the window and twirl the new spoon between your fingers. It's quiet. Normal. No glow. No whispering recipes from beyond. And yet you feel calm. Maybe it's not about magic spoons. Maybe it never was. Maybe the nobility feared wooden spoons, not because they were cursed, but because they reminded them of something dangerous. The power of the ordinary. Think about it. Silver is noble, cold, rigid, meant for show. But wood? Wood is alive. It bends. It holds warmth. It can be carved by anyone with enough time and patience. A wooden spoon doesn't declare status, it ignores it. That more than curses or cookery is what terrified them. Because if a simple peasant could create a meal that softened hearts and shifted power, if something so rustic could do so much, then maybe their silks and titles weren't so solid after all. You look at your new spoon again. No glow, no magic, just potential. And maybe that's the real power. You wake the next day to the sound of bread cracking, not a metaphor. Literal bread crisping in the hearth oven below like it's auditioning for a medieval bakery drama. The scent, toasted rye, maybe a whisper of rosemary, rises through the wooden beams and slips under your door like a mischievous house spirit. You clutch the spoon Torrin gave you, still wrapped in its cloth like a sacred relic. You haven't decided what to do with it yet. Carve your own legacy, perhaps, or stir a very symbolic porridge. But there's something else today. A letter. Slide under your door. The seal is cracked. A smear of red wax shaped suspiciously like a goose. Because of course it is, you open it. It's from Lord Edderwin, that nervous baron you met, remember? The one with the ornamental moat and the panic attacks about wooden ladles? He's inviting you to his estate. Not for a feast, no. For a consultation. He's heard rumors. About Torrin. About you. About the spoon. And he wants help. Specifically, he wants to know how to protect his noble family from the looming culinary anarchy of wooden spoons. Naturally, you say yes. You arrive at the manor 2 days later. It's grand, in the way that only insecure barons can manage. Towers that lean just enough to suggest poor engineering, and tapestries that look like they were designed by someone who had never seen a horse but was really confident about it. Lord Edderwin greets you in the great hall. His cloak is velvet. His expression is regret. Welcome, he mutters. We've had incidents. You raise an eyebrow. First it was the kitchen boy, he says. He brought a birch spoon from home, said it was sentimental. Then the royal chef used it to make leek stew and, well, the Duchess cried. Because of the flavor. No. Because she said it reminded her of her mother's wedding day. She's never remembered anything pleasant about her mother before. You nod slowly. Another case, another spoon, it's happening again. Lord Edderwin leads you to the kitchen. Inside, tension. You can smell it, along with something faintly nutty and alarmingly nostalgic. The staff eyes you like you might exercise, a saucepan at any moment. You ask to see the spoon. It's simple, hand-carved, smoothed by time and soup. You hold it. It hums, not like the spoon, softer, a lullaby instead of a sermon. And that's when it hits you. The phenomenon is spreading, not the curse. Not exactly. Something deeper. Spoons, bowls, even ladles. They're resurfacing. Peasants, cooks, even the odd scribe. People who had once hidden these things are now pulling them from drawers and attics like sacred heirlooms. And nobility. They don't know what to do with it. Because wood doesn't obey. It doesn't shine. It doesn't announce wealth. But it does something more dangerous. It connects. Historically speaking, this isn't just fantasy. Records show that in some regions, communal wooden spoons were passed from generation to generation, and some nobles tried to outlaw them, favoring utensils made from metals that marked social rank. Some even taxed wooden goods if they were carved too nicely. Historians still debate whether this was economic protectionism or just garden variety paranoia. Meanwhile, you stand in the kitchen, holding history in your hand. Lord Edderwin wants a solution. You offer one. Let them use silver, you say, but teach them how to respect wood. He blinks. You mean, make it fashionable? You smile. No, I mean make it dangerous. Again. And so begins your new role. Spoon diplomat. You travel from hall to manor, town to tower. You educate nobles, calm their fears, host quiet seminars on the symbolic threat of rustic cookware. Sometimes you joke that you're medieval Tupperware. PR. But it's more than that. Because everywhere you go, the same thing is happening. Wooden spoons are being remembered. One farmer swears his family's spoon always pointed toward food that hadn't spoiled. A midwife claims hers eased childbirth. A shepherd insists his spoon sings in the rain. None of it makes sense. And yet, it all does. There's a movement forming. Not political, not religious. Just deeply personal. A quiet rebellion of everyday tools. Even the nobility begin to shift. Some take to carving spoons themselves, in secret at first, then openly. Soon they're commissioning spoon artists. Competitive stirring tournaments emerge. A duchess writes a poem called Ode to Elm, which becomes wildly popular despite being aggressively mediocre. You're there for all of it. The center, you, and your spoon. Not the magic one. Yours. Your own. Remember the debate about whether spoons carried magical properties or were simply vessels of familiarity and repetition? Well, it's still raging. Scholars argue in hushed tones at candlelit desks. But in kitchens, the answer is simpler. Spoons are memory. Spoons are care. And for the nobility, who have always feared anything they couldn't control, that's terrifying. You attend a banquet now, not a fancy one, a shared meal, noble and servant alike. A young girl ladles soup into your bowl and grins. Carved this myself, she says. You take a bite. It tastes like warmth and wood smoke and change. The revolution is quiet. It simmers, like a pot left too long near the fire. Not with banners or swords, but with worn fingertips and slow, deliberate craftsmanship. You're sitting on a stone bench in the courtyard of a minor viscount's villa, sunlight creeping through ivy that clearly has more control over the walls than the gardeners do. Around you, nobles practice carving spoons like they're rediscovering the secret to fire. One drops his attempt and curses, softly, because there's a friar present. Another smiles sheepishly as she presents you with a spoon that, honestly, looks more like a duck's foot. You thank her like it's art, because frankly, it is. Your role now feels less like a detective and more like a therapist. You listen to lords confess their deep, spoon-based insecurities. You nod empathetically while baronesses explain how the feel of polished cherry wood reminds them of childhood and blackberry jam. And while all of this unfolds with a kind of charming awkwardness, there's still resistance. Not everyone wants this change. You're invited to an estate outside Aquitaine, a place so rigid it feels like the curtains are judging you. The lady of the house greets you with a sneer and a silver skimmer in her hand like it's a dueling sword. "I will not eat peasant soup," she announces, before you've even sat down. You pause. "What if it's noble stew?" She glares. You try again. You explain that spoons, particularly wooden ones, have a cultural weight, that they're less about class and more about connection. "Connection is for sheep," she replies, which may be the most aristocratic sentence you've ever heard. So you try another tactic. You host a tasting, 5 stews, identical recipes, each stirred with a different spoon. silver, bronze, pewter, bones, and elm. The room is full of suspicion. Then the tasting begins. Something strange happens. The silver stew is sharp, precise, but distant. The bronze one is oddly metallic. Pewter? Flat bone? Tastes like guilt and poor decisions. But the elm, the room goes silent. It's not just about flavor. It's about feeling. Something in the way the warmth lingers. The way the broth seems fuller, like a memory retold better with age. Even the lady seems moved. She doesn't admit it, of course. But later as you leave, a servant slips you a note. She asked where to find elm progress. That night, as you walk through a village square glowing with lanterns, you catch whispers of your name. Not your name specifically, but what you've become. The spoon whisperer. It's ridiculous, it's perfect. You pass a group of children drawing spoons in chalk on the cobblestones, some with smiley faces, others with angry eyebrows and tiny swords. Apparently there's a whole mythos now. You are both legend and punchline. You accept both titles with grace. Back in your rented room, you sit at the window with your own spoon. The first one Torrin gave you. You've oiled it, sanded the edges. It fits your hand now, like it always meant to. You remember something the monks told you early in your investigation, about how utensils once carried blessings. That spoons were sometimes buried with the dead as a tool for the afterlife. Historians still debate whether this was literal belief or just symbolism, but to you it doesn't matter, because every time you hold yours, it feels like holding on to something older than fear. A few months pass. The spoon renaissance continues. There's even an exhibit in the Capitol now. From bark to broth, the secret history of wooden spoons. You're featured on a tapestry mid-stir, looking far more heroic than reality warrants. You'd laugh, but honestly, the embroidery work is gorgeous. And in every hall, every inn, every roadside stew pot, something is changing. People talk more, eat slower, remember better. One noble tells you her father, once obsessed with gold goblets, now drinks broth straight from the pot using a spoon he carved with a kitchen maid. They're engaged now. You're invited to the wedding. Another man, a minor count with hands too shaky for swordplay, takes up whittling and starts a school for spooncraft. The crest of his house is updated. 3 crossed spoons over a bowl. At one point you even find yourself summoned to court. Yes, the court. The king, bored with falconry and feasts, wants to meet the person who broke the spoon barrier. He's less terrifying than you imagined, wearing a tunic embroidered with tiny turnips. He gestures to the long table beside him, lined with utensils. "I've been experimenting," he says. "Did you know pine wood spoons give wine an aftertaste like tree bark and apology?" You nod. He leans closer. Elm, though. Elm is comfort. And in that moment, as ridiculous as it is, you realize something profound. You've changed the culture, not through power, not through politics, but through persistence. And a spoon, the kind made by hand, passed in silence, used with care, and feared once by those too proud to understand it. It ends where it began. In the monastery kitchen, quiet except for the soft bubbling of soup and the occasional thud of dough on a floured table. You've come full circle, not because you were forced to, but because you wanted to. There's something poetic about returning to the place where the spoon saga first whispered its way into your life. That strange blend of reverence and rot. The place where wooden utensils were once kept behind locked doors like cursed relics. Tonight, there are no locks. The spoons hang proudly from hooks oiled and worn. Brother Torin greets you with a grin and a crooked ladle. Still whispering to wood? You chuckle. Still scaring nobles with soup? He gestures for you to sit. A bowl is placed in front of you. Thick barley and wild mushrooms scented with rosemary and something harder to name. He hands you a spoon made of ash wood. It's light, but strong. Simple, but elegant. Yours to keep, he says. You stir, and breathe, and remember. You remember the first time you held one of these cursed spoons in your hand. Back when it felt like you were cradling a live rat or some explosive relic. You remember the warnings, the sideways glances, the silent accusations. You remember nobles flinching at the sight of elm and children being scolded for eating like peasants. You remember all of it. And yet here, now, none of it matters. Because the fear has faded. Or maybe it's been reshaped, carved away like the bark from a branch, revealing something smoother underneath. Change is like that. Awkward, slow, whittled into shape one stubborn inch at a time. You sip your soup. It's perfect. You've been invited to speak at universities. Not to lecture, no, nothing that pompous, but to tell your story. To explain why the things we fear are often the things we've chosen not to understand. You say things like, wood carries memory. You see students tilt their heads, half skeptical, half enchanted. You demonstrate with a single spoon and a bowl of stew that tastes more like a warm childhood than any recipe should. And every so often, a student approaches after class with a spoon of their own, carved awkwardly perhaps or burned at the edges, and tells you they've started cooking for their family again. It's a kind of magic. Elsewhere, you hear rumors. Some claim the spoons now have healing properties, that they restore taste to the ill, that certain woods calm nightmares. None of it is scientifically proven, of course, but you don't argue. You've learned that myths, like meals, serve a purpose beyond function. In your travels, you visit an old castle where you once hosted a very nervous, noble tasting. There's now a plaque on the wall where the elm broth was served. It reads, "Here began the stirring, year of the spoon." You snort. Dramatic, sure, but not entirely wrong. You stroll through villages where spoon makers have their own stalls. Children trade tiny utensils like charms. Lovers carve initials into the handles of shared cooking tools. Even some priests now bless wooden spoons before harvest feasts, just in case. And in all this you find peace. The world is still full of clinking goblets and cold silver, but now it also holds warmth in the shape of a spoon. And fear, once sharp, metallic, aristocratic, has softened, turned round, scoop-shaped, a quiet revolution, nestled in broth and wood grain. One day, you find a letter tucked beneath your door. No signature, just a single phrase. Thank you for giving it back to us. No one ever tells you what it is, but you understand. It's not just the spoon. It's the right to choose how one eats, how one remembers, how one holds tradition without fear. You lean back. Let the quiet settle in. Outside, someone is singing. Softly. Off-key. And inside, the soup is still warm. You hold your spoon loosely now, the way one might cradle a sleeping idea. Not too tight, lest you wake it. You've earned your rest. You've earned the silence. And now, the journey slows. Your breath, once quick with curiosity, can soften. The night stretches gently across the land like a velvet curtain, closing softly on a story well stirred. In the distance, torches flicker low in stone-walled halls, and the clatter of cutlery gives way to hushed voices, full bellies and memories held close. Even the most stubborn noble lays their head down tonight with a hand-carved spoon resting nearby, a token of something not just tasted, but learned. You've walked through kitchens filled with steam and suspicion, across banquet halls heavy with pride, and through markets humming with laughter and the sharp scent of new wood. You've seen fear dressed in silk and humility carved into elm. You've reminded the world that even the smallest things, the overlooked, the feared, the humble, can hold more power than gold. And so, in this moment, as your eyes begin to close and your breath evens out, know this. The past is not as far away as we imagine. It lives in stories, in meals, in the weight of a spoon in the hand of someone brave enough to use it. Tonight you are safe, wrapped in stillness, held by history. May your dreams be quiet and full of warm light, like soup shared between friends beside a crackling fire. And if you wake before the sun, may you smile just once and whisper, "Elm tastes better."